When I unfolded that envelope, I swear I could hear my pulse pounding in my ears. It was my husband's handwriting, so familiar, so intimate, that for a moment I felt like he was standing right there beside me. The loops of the letters, the careful way he always pressed a little too hard with his pen. It was him. My husband. My love. At first, I thought it was a goodbye. You know, the kind of letter that someone leaves behind when they don't know how to say the words out loud. It was tender, almost beautiful. He wrote about how much he loved me, about how he regretted the things he never got to do, the time he didn't spend, the moments we lost in between work and stress and life. I could hear his voice in my head as I read each line, and I broke down right there on the floor, clutching the paper like it was the last piece of him I had left. But then, the tone shifted. His words grew colder, more deliberate. He wrote about duty, about keeping the neighborhood safe, about standing firm against change. At first, I didn't understand what he meant. I thought maybe it was some metaphor, some poetic nonsense he was scribbling in his grief or guilt. But the deeper I read, the more I realized this wasn't poetry. This wasn't metaphor. This was hate. He wasn't talking about neighbors. He was talking about people, families, people he believed didn't belong here, people he wanted gone. I dropped the letter, and it landed on the floor with a soft little thud that sounded louder than any thunder. My chest tightened. My hands shook. Suddenly, I didn't know the man I'd been married to for over a decade. I didn't know the person I'd shared my bed with, cooked for, laughed with. I thought back to the late nights when he came home smelling faintly of smoke, the hushed phone calls that ended when I walked into the room, the way he'd brush me off whenever I asked about the Johnsons, or the Garcias, or the Woos, the families who packed up and vanished in the middle of the night. Back then, I told myself it was coincidence. People move. Life changes. But sitting there, staring at his handwriting, I knew the truth. He was part of it. He had a hand in driving them out. I couldn't breathe. I wanted to scream, to tear the letter into pieces, to throw it into the fire and pretend I had never seen it. But my eyes, they drifted toward the garage. That garage he always kept locked. The one he told me to never bother with. My legs felt like stone, but somehow I got up. I walked across the house like I was in a dream, like maybe none of this was real. My hands fumbled with the keys until finally I found the one that fit. The lock clicked, and when I pulled the door open, a cold draft hit me. There, shoved in the corner under an old tarp, was a metal box, heavy, rusted around the edges. My heart was hammering so hard I thought it might burst out of my chest. I dragged it out, dropped to my knees, and pried it open. Inside, I found everything. Photographs, names, addresses, handwritten notes, records of families I remembered. Families who had smiled at me, waved at me, who had children that played in the street. And then, just like that, they were gone. It all connected now, and it made me sick. I don't know how long I sat there staring at those papers. Hours, maybe. My whole body was trembling. My husband, the man I thought I knew better than anyone else, had built his life with me while hiding this darkness, and I couldn't unsee it. I shoved everything back into the box, slammed it shut, and locked the garage again. But the weight of that box didn't stay there. It followed me, into the kitchen, into the bedroom, into my chest, pressing down until I couldn't breathe. That night, I didn't sleep. I lay awake, staring at the ceiling, hearing every creak of the house like it was a warning. I pulled the covers tighter, my eyes darting to the window whenever a shadow shifted. And the thought wouldn't leave me. If he had been involved in this, who else was? Who else in this neighborhood knew? Who else was still out there? And worse, did they know that I knew? For days, I couldn't bring myself to open the box again. But the letter haunted me. Every word replayed in my head. I started seeing the world differently. When a car slowed down on our street, I wondered if they were watching me. When I walked outside, I felt eyes on my back. The air itself felt heavier, charged with something invisible and dangerous. I thought about going to the police. But what if they were part of it too? What if they dismissed me, or worse, told them that I had the box? I thought about telling a friend. But then I looked around and realized I didn't even know who I could trust anymore. One evening, I finally broke. I sat at the kitchen table with the letter spread out in front of me, my hands trembling as I traced the words over and over, like maybe if I looked long enough, the meaning would change. That somehow I could make him into the man I thought he was. But the words were clear, and the question that haunted me was unbearable. What am I supposed to do with this? If I kept it hidden, no one would ever know. Those families would stay voiceless, their pain erased. But if I exposed it, if I showed the world, then everything would be destroyed. The image of the man I loved, the life I thought we had, and maybe even me. That's when I heard it. A knock at the door, sharp, sudden, loud, and my blood ran cold. The knock came again, harder this time. 3 sharp raps that rattled the wood and sent my heart into my throat. I didn't move. I didn't breathe. I just sat there, staring at the door like it might burst open at any second. My fingers dug into the edge of the table until my knuckles turned white. It was almost midnight. Who would be here at this hour? My first thought, irrational maybe, but unstoppable, was that they knew. Someone knew I had the letter. Someone knew about the box. And now they were here. I wanted to get up, to call out, to demand who it was. But my voice wouldn't work. It was like my throat had sealed itself shut. The knocking stopped. Silence stretched on so long I started to wonder if I had imagined it. But then, there it was. A voice. Low, calm, male. Clara, we just need to talk. Hearing my husband's name for me, Clara, spoken by someone else at my door, at that hour, froze me to the bone. I hadn't told anyone about the letter. I hadn't told anyone about the box. How could they possibly know my name? I pressed a hand against my mouth to stifle my breathing. The kitchen felt smaller, like the walls were folding in on me. I thought about grabbing the box, dragging it to the basement, hiding it somewhere no one would ever find it. But my body wouldn't move. Then, another sound. From the back of the house. I whipped my head toward the window. A faint scrape, like metal against glass. My skin prickled. My stomach dropped. They weren't just at the door. Someone was at the window too. Panic surged through me. They were surrounding the house. I ran to the living room, my bare feet slapping against the floor, and snatched up the metal box. It was heavier than I remembered, the corners biting into my arms. I hugged it to my chest and backed into the hallway, my eyes darting from door to window to shadow. What did they want? Was it the box? Was it me? The knocking came again, this time violent, angry, like fists slamming into the door. My heart was slamming just as hard inside my chest. I grabbed my phone. My thumb hovered over the numbers, ready to dial, but I froze. What if the police were part of this? What if they laughed? Or worse, what if they already knew and told the very people trying to get in? The pounding grew louder. The windows rattled. I thought the glass would shatter. My whole body shook so violently, I thought I might collapse. And then, silence. Complete, suffocating silence. I stood in the hallway, clutching the box, staring at the door. I waited. A minute. 2. Nothing. I finally forced myself to creep closer, one slow step at a time, my breath shallow. I pressed my eye to the peephole. The street outside was empty. No one at the door, no car parked nearby, no shadows moving in the dark, just the flicker of the streetlight, buzzing softly like nothing had happened. But I knew better. I stumbled back from the door, clutching the box so tight my arms ached. They'd been there. I had heard them. I had felt the vibration of the pounding through the floor. And that voice, it had said my name. I barely slept that night. I curled up on the couch with the box against me. Every light in the house left on, my ears straining at every noise, the heater clicking on, the branches scratching against the window. Each sound felt like a warning, like a countdown to something worse. By morning, I knew I couldn't keep this inside anymore. If they knew, if they were already coming for me, then holding on to this secret wouldn't save me. It would destroy me. I thought about calling a friend, but as soon as I picked up my phone, my hands froze again. Who could I trust? Which of my neighbors smiled at me while hiding the same darkness my husband had kept? Which of them already suspected I had the box? So I did nothing, and that's when I heard it again. Not the knock this time. The scrape at the back window. Closer, longer, deliberate, like someone testing the lock. My whole body froze. The box slipped from my lap and landed on the floor with a dull clang. My heart was so loud, I thought whoever was outside would hear it. I crept toward the kitchen, each step slower than the last, until I reached the window. My hands trembled as I reached for the curtain. I hesitated, then yanked it back. For half a second, I swore I saw a shadow pull away from the glass. A human shape. Then nothing. Just the reflection of my own wide, terrified eyes staring back at me. I stumbled back, clutching the counter to stay upright. I wanted to scream, to call someone, anyone. But the only sound that left me was a whisper. Oh my God, they're watching me. And in that moment, I realized they weren't going to stop. I couldn't live like that, waiting for a sound that might never come, shrinking away from my own front window. So one afternoon, when the sun finally felt like a small mercy, I did something I'd been turning over in my mind for days. I made a plan. Not a brave, cinematic plan, just something practical, messy, and horribly alone. First, I moved the box. I wrapped it in an old blanket and carried it down into the cellar, the concrete cold against my fingertips. Every step felt like a betrayal and a confession at once. Why had I never gone down there before? Because it was his space, his little kingdom of tools and secrets. Now it felt like a tomb. I set the box under the workbench where the spider webs hung like faded curtains and sat on the step, breathing hard, listening for sounds that weren't there. I needed copies, evidence that wasn't trapped in a rusted tin that could vanish if someone decided I knew too much. I couldn't risk bringing it out in daylight. People noticed things during the day. So, that night, I waited until the house exhaled. No cars, no dogs barking, just the soft hum of the heater. And I brought the box upstairs. My hands trembled. I fumbled with envelopes, photographs, lists with names. I spread them across the kitchen table, each scrap a tiny shard of what had been done. I used my phone to take photos, one by one, careful not to blur the handwriting. I whispered apologies to people I'd never met, families who'd been erased like bad grammar. "I'm sorry," I told each picture, ridiculous and necessary. The light from the lamp made the pages glow like confessions. I made duplicates, then duplicates of duplicates, saving them to cloud accounts I'd set up with fake names. I wrote notes to myself, dates, locations, little things I might forget when fear squeezed my memory. Halfway through, I heard the truck. At first, I told myself it was the neighbor leaving for work. Then I realized it was backing into our driveway. My stomach dropped so low I felt hollow. I slid into the shadow by the pantry and watched the window. The truck's headlights cut through the dusk like knives. A man climbed out, someone taller than my husband, with a heavy coat and a slow gait that made my bones ache. He stood at the edge of the yard and looked up at the house, not with a flashlight, but with the kind of stare that studies a face it already knows. He didn't move. He just stood. Then he spoke softly, like a friend calling across a fence, and because my throat was dry and my hands were full, I couldn't stop the sound that escaped me. A wet, small noise that might have been a cry. He looked up suddenly, like he'd felt it, like he could hear me breathing from inside the walls. For the first time since the letter, a real, hot spike of anger cut through the fear. I wasn't going to be watched like a specimen under glass. I grabbed my phone, keyed in the number of a reporter I'd once met at the library during a community forum, someone who had asked the right questions and had a voice that didn't belong to anyone in our town. I typed a short, clipped message. "I have documents. I can't call. Please meet." I hit send and felt my pulse thud in my ears so loud it was almost a timer. There was no immediate reply. There was never an immediate reply in things that mattered. The man outside had moved. He was at the side of the house, stepping quietly toward the back, and the sound of his boots against gravel made me want to vomit. I wanted to go out there and scream at him, to demand the truth like a vindicated child, but I couldn't. Instead, I crept to the bedroom and pulled the curtains just enough to see a sliver of night. He bent, something metallic glinting in his hand. He ran his hand along the foundation, a searching motion, like someone feeling for a loose brick. The message finally came. He could meet. Tomorrow. A coffee shop 2 towns over, midday. No cameras, no names. Just a place where the world felt less like our town's eyes and more like a crowd that couldn't see me. I breathed. For a second, hope was a warm, stupid thing. And then I remembered. People in this town didn't just vanish without help. People were pushed, sometimes by those who smiled at them from porches. If I went to that coffee shop, if I showed him what I had, would it matter? Would a story change anything? Maybe. Maybe it would. I slept that night curled around the box like a shield. The man's silhouette drifted through my dreams. Angry, patient, impossible to place. I woke with the taste of iron in my mouth and the rawness of a scream stuck in my throat. I dressed, slipping on clothes that made me feel like someone who might survive a confrontation. I left the curtains closed and the lights off, because the ordinary routine of neighbors seeing me up and about made me feel like a soap opera. At noon, I drove with my hands white-knuckled on the wheel to the coffee shop. I parked 2 blocks away and walked in slow circle, until my legs wanted to run. The place smelled like burnt espresso and reassurance. He was late. I ordered water, something small that made me feel steady, and sat with my back to the wall like a person at the center of a slow hurricane. He arrived finally, mid-50s, hair receding, eyes that carried both calculation and a tired kind of hope. He introduced himself as Jonah, but there was something about the way he folded his jacket over his arm, the way he asked soft, direct questions that cut through the usual defenses reporters have. I slid my phone across the table, photos face up, and watched his face change from curiosity to something like sorrow, and then to a professional focus that made the air between us cold. He asked gentle questions. How long had I known? Had I talked to anyone? Did I want to go public? Each question landed like a stone. I wanted him to promise to make it right. Instead, he offered the tools to make it visible. He explained, in a voice that was careful and practical, that the pieces I had were enough to start an investigation, to force other authorities to look. He said the word exposure, and my stomach did a strange flip. When I left, Jonah promised confidentiality, but he also said something I hadn't expected. You might be in danger. His voice was quiet, a warning that didn't come with the coddling tone of someone who thinks they can protect you with their words. He told me to be careful. Don't go home alone at night. Change my routine. Don't tell anyone. It was advice that felt like armor, and also like a chain. I drove back slower than I left, thinking about trust and how easily it shatters. I thought about how many polite smiles in our neighborhood might hide the sort of allegiance that removes families in the night. I was on the street 2 blocks from my house when my phone vibrated like an accusation. A text. No number. No sender. I opened it with a hand that wouldn't stop trembling. We know, it said. My breath stopped. The letters on my screen swam. I killed my engine, sitting in my car with my hands on the wheel, feeling the color drain from the world. We know. The message was simple and brutal. Not a request, not a threat spelled out, just confirmation that whatever small, brave step I had taken, finding someone who might listen, had been watched. I thought about turning around, driving to Jonah, begging him to come with me, to stay with me, to be a witness. And then I thought about the knock, the scrape at the window, the man at my gate. I thought about the list of names in that box and how many eyes had read those names and followed them like a ledger. The engine of a truck started somewhere down the street, a low, familiar rumble. My hands tightened on the wheel until my knuckles screamed. I sat there for a long time, feeling the cold of the steering wheel through my palms. The world was the same. It didn't know I was unraveling, but inside my chest, something had broken open in a way I couldn't ignore. I drove home. The house was too quiet. The curtains were closed. The mailbox had a single flyer in it, the kind that tells you about a hardware sale and nothing about the fear that hangs heavy in the air. I opened the door, and the smell of my life greeted me like a stranger. I shoved the box under the couch and sat down on the floor, heart hammering so loud I could hardly hear myself think. Then, from the dark hallway, my phone buzzed again. Another message. Another screen of black and white letters. You shouldn't have done that. My throat closed. The floor felt like it was tilting. I read the words over and over until they blurred. I thought of Jonah's sympathetic professional face and wondered if maybe I had been foolish to climb out of the hole I'd been hiding in. There was a soft scrape at the back gate. I didn't have time to decide anything. Something on the other side of the yard moved, and a shadow slid along the fence like a hand before a slap. The floorboards creaked under me like a confession. Someone was in my yard. I pressed the phone against my chest and whispered, to no one and to everyone, please, just let me be wrong. The lock on the back door rattled. I froze. My breath stuck somewhere between my throat and my chest. The box was under the couch, heavy and solid, but useless as a shield. Every instinct screamed at me to run, to escape, to scream for help, but my body refused. The lock rattled again, louder, closer. It was deliberate this time, not random. Whoever, or whatever, was out there knew exactly what they were doing. I could hear the floorboards creak outside, the faint scrape of shoes against gravel. Each sound was a pinprick in my chest, making my heart pound faster. I pressed my back against the couch, trying to make myself as small as possible, as if shrinking could make me invisible. "Clara!" A voice hissed through the door, soft, but it carried an edge that made my skin crawl. "We know what you've done. Hand it over." I swallowed hard. My fingers dug into the edge of the couch. I wanted to scream, to say no, to protect what I had worked so hard to save. But I also knew the truth. If I left the house like this, if I ran, I would be nothing more than prey. And if I let them take the box, every family erased would stay silent forever. I whispered to myself, shaking. I can't. I can't. I won't. The doorknob turned, slowly, deliberately. My stomach lurched. I pressed myself harder against the couch, willing the shadows to swallow me whole. Then came a sound that made my blood run cold. The sliding of the back gate. Heavy, deliberate. I could hear the footsteps moving closer to the house, to the back door that led into the kitchen. My heart felt like it was trying to escape my ribcage. I grabbed my phone, dialing 911 with trembling hands. My fingers slipped over the screen, nearly dropping the phone. But finally, I got a line. I whispered, Someone's in my house. Please, help." The operator's voice was calm, professional, grounding, but I could barely hear her over the roar of my own panic. "Stay on the line. Do not engage with them. Hide somewhere safe." I clutched the box to my chest. Every thought raced. Should I run? Should I hide it? Should I confront them? I knew the wrong move could cost me everything. A shadow appeared at the window. I couldn't breathe. The figure was tall, moving slowly, hands brushing along the sill as if testing the frame. Whoever it was had been watching me, waiting. My stomach twisted in terror. I thought of the families in the photographs, the names I had memorized. I thought of the ones my husband had helped push away. And then something shifted in me. Fear didn't leave. I could feel it, raw and screaming, but anger joined it. Anger that no one else should ever be forced to feel this helpless. Anger that I was going to let them silence me. I stood up, holding the box in front of me like a shield. My legs were shaking, but I forced myself to my feet. "Stop!" I shouted, my voice cracking but loud enough to carry through the quiet house. "Leave now! You have no right to be here!" The shadow froze. A pause. Then footsteps retreated slightly, cautious. I realized they hadn't expected resistance. I opened the back door just a crack, enough to see them clearly. One man, wearing a dark coat, standing at the edge of the yard. His eyes were unreadable. "Clara," he said again, calm, almost coaxing. "You don't understand what you've done." "I understand perfectly," I said. My voice steadied despite my racing heart. "You can't keep hiding behind fear and silence. I have proof. I will make it known. Every name, every photograph, every family you drove away. I will make sure the world sees it." For a moment, he didn't move. Then, slowly, Almost reluctantly, he turned and walked away. The shadow at the window melted into the darkness. I sank against the doorframe, my knees weak, shaking, sobbing. I had survived. I didn't know how, and I didn't care. All I knew was that the box, the letters, the photographs, they were safe with me for now. And more importantly, their stories weren't going to disappear into the night. I locked every door, every window, and sat on the living room floor, hugging the box like it was a child. My body trembled for hours, adrenaline crashing into exhaustion. I thought about my husband, the man I had loved, and how deeply his secrets had cut into our lives. I thought about the families he had helped erase and how powerless they must have felt. And I thought about me, standing in the center of that storm, realizing that sometimes the only way to fight darkness is to hold on to it long enough to shine a light. I called Jonah, the reporter, the next morning. We made plans to deliver the evidence safely, to ensure it reached people who could act, who could demand justice, who could give those silenced families back some part of their story. And as I spoke to him, I realized something. Fear could chase me. Shadows could haunt me. But silence was not an option. Not anymore. Sitting there, with the morning light creeping through the blinds, I felt a strange mix of fear and relief. The danger wasn't gone. It never truly is. But so long as I held the truth, I had power. Power to make people see. Power to prevent more lives from being quietly destroyed. Power to honor the families who had been erased. And I thought about my own life, and how fragile safety really is, and how easily trust can be weaponized. I thought about every neighbor who smiled at me, who might hide a darkness behind their doors. I thought about the world and how much it ignores things happening in plain sight. I finally understood what it meant to carry someone else's stories, their pain, their erased histories, carried them with me that day, and every day since. The box wasn't just metal and paper. It was memory. It was truth. It was justice waiting to be acted upon. And I asked myself one last question as I closed the front door, locking it with deliberate care. How many more stories like this are out there, waiting for someone brave or desperate enough to uncover them? Because I had seen it. I had held it. I had lived it. And the world needed to see it too. The days after that night were quiet. Almost too quiet. The house felt empty in a way that had nothing to do with my husband being gone. Every corner, every shadow reminded me of what had been hidden in plain sight. I kept the box under my bed for weeks, only touching it when I needed to remind myself that the truth still existed, that the stories of those families hadn't been lost completely. I began to think about what fear does to people, how it can twist ordinary lives into prisons, how it can make neighbors, friends, even loved ones, people you trust, into strangers capable of hiding cruelty behind their smiles. I had thought I understood my world, my town, my life with him. And then I realized how fragile all of it had been. Turning the evidence over to Jonah, the reporter, was like stepping into a storm. There was fear, yes, fear for myself, for what might come back at me. But there was also clarity. The letters, the photographs, the names. They had power now. And I had a responsibility. I wasn't just holding my husband's secret anymore. I was holding the memory of every family who had been forced out. Every child who had gone to bed afraid. Every neighbor who had vanished quietly in the night. The impact was immediate in ways I hadn't expected. Jonah's investigation rippled through our town, uncovering alliances, silences, and betrayals I hadn't known existed. People I thought I could trust avoided me. Some doors closed entirely, but others opened. Families came forward, speaking about what they had endured. People I hadn't even met shared their experiences. And in those moments, I realized something. Silence doesn't protect us. Silence only protects the ones who want to harm. I couldn't erase what my husband had done. I couldn't forget the years of lies, the normal life that had been built on hidden cruelty. But I could use what I had to give voice to the voiceless, to shine a light into corners where shadows had thrived for too long. That's what mattered. That's what made surviving worth it. Sometimes, at night, I still hear footsteps outside. Sometimes I feel the weight of eyes, even when no one is there. Fear is a stubborn companion, but fear alone doesn't own me anymore. I hold the truth, and the truth is stronger than any threat, stronger than any shadow. So I ask you, whoever is listening, how often do we choose comfort over courage? How many secrets do we let fester in silence? How many lives go unnoticed, erased, or forgotten because people are afraid to speak? I don't know all the answers. I only know this. One voice can make a difference. One truth can expose darkness. One person brave enough to hold it can start change. And maybe, just maybe, that's how we stop history from repeating itself. Because I survived. And those families deserve more than silence. They deserve to be seen. They deserve to be remembered. And the question I leave with you is simple, but impossible to ignore. When you see injustice, will you look away? Or will you act?